Look, I was interested. You made some fairly, I suppose, strong statements in your submission. You talked about the current mixed model approach to coordinating Australia's Antarctic interests, which is led by the AAD, and you've said that's highly effective, but that the current funding arrangements represent a chronic underinvestment, and that access and infrastructure arrangements are woefully inadequate. And you've talked about 100 high-quality science projects per year to deliver a credible Antarctic program. Could you tell us how this compares with the present level of research and where we need to go to achieve that?
I'm happy to speak to that to start with. The current Antarctic program funds three large-ish stations in Antarctica, as well as one ship, an airlink, the Wilkins Base and Macquarie Island. And managing all of that comes at a certain fixed cost per year, and that fixed cost goes up. So in an environment where you have to maintain all of those services and your budget is shrinking, the residual budget that you have left to do your science program is just shrinking year on year on year. And unfortunately, it has been the science program within the Australian Antarctic program that has been seen as the discretionary part that gets squeezed as budgets get squeezed. And that's why we've seen a very, very significant reduction in the amount of marine science time in particular. If I look back to the start of my research career in the early 90s, the Antarctic program operated 2 ships and we had between 50 and 60 days of marine science every year. Now we have 1 ship. It is very limited in the amount of marine science work that can be done in any given season, and it can only be juggled between its requirements to visit all of the other stations and do all of its logistics work. So you're very constrained in even when you might be able to undertake a marine science voyage. I don't think the Antarctic Division currently can fund more than about 7 to 10 days in any given season of marine science. And of course, if something goes wrong, as we saw last season when the Russian tourist vessel was stuck, then all bets are off, and any science that is planned becomes completely derailed. So there's really very little slack in the system now to cope with unforeseen events, and science has paid the price for that.
Just a brief addition to that. This is an issue that's been facing the community for many years, the fact that the science budget is the easy part to cut, and if the operation costs go up. And I've often wondered whether it would be worth separating the 2 budgets, in effect. In the US program, for example, that largely happens. The science is funded through the National Science Foundation, which is independently funded from the operational parts, for example. And I've often wondered whether something like that may be worth doing. It has problems because you can't necessarily link the 2 together readily if you have totally different agencies. But somewhere within the AAD's budget, whether the science part could be protected would be I suspect, a very beneficial.
What's something the committee can certainly look at. And these 7 to 10 days a year that we're down to now, how many of those types of projects would be internationally collaborative projects?
The vast majority.
Vast majority of them.
Yes.
So we're not. This is not just an Australian science, so to speak. These are international programs that are collaborating with some of the best scientists around the world.
So most of the marine science, in fact, I could go out on a limb and say all of the major marine science voyages that are undertaken by the Australian program would include world-leading scientists from other countries. We would always extend an invitation to world experts that can provide complementarity to our own expertise on any particular voyage. And I have to say other countries do the same thing. So we would participate, Australian scientists would participate on German and American and French expeditions that are also undertaking research. So it is very much an international space that we operate in.
Okay. And some of these projects would take how long? What sort of time frame are we looking at in terms of needing certainty for funding and obviously resources and the ability to get the observations you were talking about earlier? Are we talking about a few years or 10, 15 years?
So they do take a long lead time. Access to the vessels is always via a competitive process. So you need to write the proposal and submit it. It needs to be peer reviewed. It then needs to be assessed by a committee as to not only how it ranked, but whether it can be supported operationally and how the competing demands for vessel time would then be juggled. And then all of the participants obviously have to have sufficient time to be able to arrange to be involved as well. So they tend to take years rather than decades to plan.
Sorry, last question, Chair. But
If I could just add to
At the very
that,
last, we are running out of
the
time.
duration of the observation programs often are very, very long indeed, because the processes that you're looking at are long-term processes.
like
So once
ocean
you start,
acidification, for example.
it could be decades if you're interested in the long-term changes.
Okay.